Hello everybody and welcome to another Twilight Zone Retro Review. Today it is Season 1, Episode 26, Execution, written by Rod Serling, starring Albert Salmi as Joe Caswell and Russell Johnson as George. Okay, so words I would use to describe Execution. Action-packed, fast-paced, strange, uneven. That about sums up the positive and negative qualities of this episode, which is all over the place. There's a lot that happens, so I will get right to it. Okay, this episode starts with in the Old West for the second time in the series, even though it won't stay there. And we have a cowboy named Joe who is about to be hung for, it appears, shooting a man's son in the back. And we can tell right away this man is not remorseful at all. And he's just about to be hung. Well, what happens is when the news drops and he's being hung, he suddenly disappears. And when we come back, he's in a new time place where we meet Russell Johnson's character, who I looked up, and his name is George, but they don't really say that. I'll just call him the scientist because I don't think they actually ever specifically say his name in the episode. So this scientist explains to him that he was the first ever time traveler, and he was brought to the present in a time machine. We go to the next scene, and the doctor says that he's resting, and he's narrating into a tape recorder. He talks about the man's story, and we find out that Joe lied to him and told him he was herding cattle when he came into the future, even though we know that's not true. And the scientist talks about his concerns about the man. He doesn't like the look of him. He feels something's wrong in his story and things like that. So we go on a little bit further, and Joe comes back in, and he tells the scientist that he wants to see the world. So the scientist, has him look out the window, and Joe is really shocked by what he sees. You can tell he's overwhelmed, and this to me is the strongest positive about the episode. I've seen a lot of stories with time travel, and a lot of times to me the characters too easily accept going forward or backward in time. In this episode, the character Joe is legitimately overwhelmed and confused by everything that happens. I really like the way this part of the episode was written. But, however, there's some other things I don't like, unfortunately, which are coming up, which I will get into now. So, anyway, what happens is the scientist puts two and two together, figures out what happens, and, he confronts Joe about it. He tells him, "You were at the end of a rope, weren't you? You were about to be hanged, and I saved you from that. I have to send you back, to fulfill the justice." So they have an interesting discussion about justice and about what it is and what it isn't. And that was okay, but my problems here are that, first of all, wouldn't it be a little premature to just send him back without knowing the whole story? I know the man apparently isn't really a good guy, but you don't really know anything about the situation, and you're just going to send him back just like that without thinking about it or anything. That seems a little premature to me, and it seems more like a plot contrivance for what happens in the next part of the episode. And the second problem is, if you were going to do that, would you really tell him? A guy you don't trust that's bad, you're going to tell him that you're going to send him back? Wouldn't you try and trick him in some way? This whole scene just doesn't really work for me. But it sets up the second part of the episode, so okay, whatever. So what happens is, of course, Joe attacks him because he doesn't want to be sent back. He hits him over the head, and he leaves. And then we get a good scene where Joe is running around town, and he gets disoriented. He's tricked by a phone booth. He goes into a bar, destroys a jukebox, shoots up a TV. He's just really confused. And like I said, that's the one thing I really like about this episode, is his confusion. It makes sense to me. And so, of course, after he goes in this bar and tears it up, the police are called by the bartender. He runs out. He goes back to the lab or office or whatever it is, I'm not really sure, where the scientist is still, still down. And another man comes in that wants to rob the place, apparently, and he holds a gun on Joe. And they actually get into a fight, which, surprisingly, the other man wins. His name's Paul, I believe. Didn't really see that one coming. I had actually forgotten that. I've seen these, of course, all before, but some of them it's been quite a few years, and I totally forgot that the other guy won the fight. So kudos to that unpredictability, and the fight is pretty well staged for that time period too. It looked pretty good. So a lot of good action there. And what winds up happening is, though, after the other man, Paul, wins the fight, he looks around for a little bit. He's curious about the time machine, and he actually gets trapped in the time machine, and he winds up going back to the Old West, and he appears on the the noose of the rope, and he winds up getting hung. So even though Joe doesn't get hung, it goes back to the beginning where the people that were going to hang him are, and this man gets hung, and they talk about they hope they didn't hang an innocent man. We know that they didn't, but I like that the question's brought up because it brings up some interesting questions too about, the legitimacy of those types of things. I like the moral dilemma at the end of this episode that they're not really sure. Something else to think about. So overall, this episode is all over the place. There's some really good things about it. One thing perhaps that I think should have been considered, maybe they would have needed a longer episode. I really don't like that two characters in this episode are out and out bad. I'm the type, I understand sometimes you just need a good flat out villain, but in this case I think it would have been more interesting to have a character that was kind of in between, like parts good, parts bad, if that's the right way to say it, because you really can't root for the characters in this episode, and I think that's kind of a problem. Maybe we're not supposed to, because ultimately the so-called justice is, or the justice is handed out, but maybe a little more, ambiguity, I guess is the right word, between the main character and the man that ultimately does get hung would have been better, because it would have added, you would have had more mixed feelings. But I guess Rod Serling wanted a straight out and out moral lesson here, which is fine. But overall, this episode is somewhat memorable, and it's actually rewatchable. There's just things about the plotting and characterization that I think are off at times. So I'm going to go in the middle on this one, and I give Execution a 2.5 out of 5. 2.5 out of 5 for Execution. Thanks for watching.